Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. I'm the author of the Advaitaholics Anonymous books, Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts, and a manifesto for spiritual anarchy, published by New Serum Press. They're available through Amazon in Kindle and paperback formats, and you can find them by clicking the links in the description below. Both my books have had a big impact and found great support among many veteran seekers for their willingness to critique spiritual culture, which, in my view, can act as a decoy designed to keep our vision perpetually focused away from what is most evident. My purpose with the Spiritually Incorrect podcast series is to connect and engage with other writers, thinkers, and spiritual teachers who don't necessarily fall into the traditional guru stereotype. The idea is to explore some of the topics I cover in my books beyond the realm of my own opinions in the matter. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome my next guest. He's not your typical spiritual teacher and runs the website zenbitchslap.com. Welcome, Paul Hedderman.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. So this is our first time talking pretty much. And I was introduced to you, Paul, by a reader of mine who said, Shiv, you got to interview Paul Hedderman. He's so in your lane. Like this kind of stuff he says is very much along the lines of the kind of stuff you write about. So I was curious and I checked out some of your videos and I really liked your style of delivery, which is kind of uncompromising. It's just like anytime your mind starts going off somewhere into rationalizing non-duality in any way, you just you sort of cut that off. So just in terms of your own sort of teaching style or approach, for viewers who aren't familiar with you, how would you sort of sum that up?
I think it sums up itself. It's just, my preparing is based on being unprepared, basically. Yeah. So the body shows up and then something gets ignited, things happen. Yeah. But the point is, I hit a ceiling at one point where it was clear that if you don't see something, you're going to be looking from it. So I attempt to stay with that. Yeah. If you don't see something, you're going to be looking from it. This identification as the doer and stuff like that. Yeah. So, yeah. And because we're probably pretty unpopular and very disorganized, you can stay on point, so to speak. There was a very good story attributed to Ramana Maharshi. You know Ramana Maharshi, yes? The godfather of modern non-duality, you could say. Yeah, so Ramana Maharshi had a lot of people, and a number of them were in a room, and they were talking about if they were ready to teach, yeah. And they were talking amongst themselves, and he walked in, and then so they asked him and said, Ramana, are we ready to teach? And he says, definitely, but I don't recommend it. Yeah? And they go, well, why? He says, well, compassion. And then they was more perplexed. They go, can you explain? He says, yeah, you'll be sitting in front of a group and you'll feel compassion and you'll dilute the message. Yeah. So basically, in a way, the situation we're in, there's no need to dilute the message. Yes, basically. Yeah. So we're not trying to we're not trying to get anywhere with it or trying to arrive somewhere or to increase it or to grow something. We're just putting out some information, see if it works.
But
Yeah.
what's ironic is that most of teachers of non-duality attempt to claim, or at least claim, some kind of connection or lineage, going back to Ramana Maharshi, and they're all sitting there doing retreats, doing intensives, teaching the same thing over and over again, year over year, as if there's something new to talk about, or as if people need constant reminders every 5 minutes. So what do you think that's all based on? Because the message really is simple. It's like it takes like all of 5 seconds to express it, right?
I don't know what it's based on because again, I had I came around to this idea in the 90s, let's say. Yes, I had read a book by a guy named Ramesh Balsekar called "Who Cares," and that book was stopping the mental logic like every page. And just I hadn't had so many pauses in quite a while. The logic just continues to reinforce itself. And what was being said was like a gap would occur and there would be a suspension of a movement away from the gap. So was really keen on that. And I was keen enough that he was old. He was 85, I think. So I wanted to see him before he died. So I went to Bombay and I saw him. I don't even know what you just asked me, but I went to see him, and and then I went to see where Ramana Maharshi lived, Tiruvannamalai. And it was funny because when I went to Ramana Maharshi's ashram to ask to stay there, the first question they asked me, are you going to go to these outside satsangs? And I proudly said yes. And they said, you can't stay here. And probably a lot of those people giving the outside satsangs at Tiruvannamalai were probably having a picture of Ramana there. And Ramana's ashram was totally not into them at all. So it was sort of funny. I had to find another ashram to stay at. So what occurred is I was at a meeting of a guy comes from the Zen lineage, and he started to laugh. I hadn't heard him laugh this way, and he said, I'm like a man standing by the river selling water. Yeah. And then he says, it's even funnier that I'm a man standing in the river selling water. And I sort of got that, and I never came back. Yeah, I walked out, and that was that. Yeah, I just felt the futility of searching. Yeah. And that really the message of non-duality in my sense, is such a clear message. It doesn't feed that searching. It sort of presents a premise that being ourselves reality, yeah, where the whole idea of becoming reality or returning to reality or arriving back at reality because I took a wrong turn somewhere is completely dismissed, completely. And yeah, that's that. So the only way you can really look at it is through a negative lens. You have to see, this is the thing. The first video we ever did was based on an old Indian story about there's a lion, a mother lion, and a cub, and they're roaming around, and the mother gets killed, and the cub is sort of orphaned, doesn't know what's going on. It's roaming around the savannah, and he sees like a herd of sheep. Now the sheep knows it's a lion. They get a little anxious, but it becomes obvious to them it doesn't know it's a lion. And so it gets ingratiated into the flock or the herd. And it's, trying to chew cud and live like a sheep and listen to everyone's concerns about being next year's sweater. And it's not really getting it, but he doesn't know any better. He's a sheep for all intents and purposes. And he's looking at other sheep to eat them, really, but the other sheep is like thinking he wants to go out with them and shit. And so then he gets accepted, and he becomes a great elder in this herd, and he marries a sheep, a female sheep. They have strange kids, but they just rationalize it away. And then one day they're just hanging around chewing cud, and a big lion shows up, comes around the hill, starts running after the herd. And then he sees this other lion and he thinks it's joining the hunt, and it realizes it's running with the sheep. So he veers off and he tackles the young lion, and the young lion rolls over on its back and says, "Please, Mr. Lion, don't eat me. I'm just a humble sheep." Now, the old lion's a little perplexed, grabs that young lion's head and drags him to the water hole, puts both of their heads over, and the young lion sees the reflections. Bammo, yeah, gets it. So the old lion goes roar. Now the young lion doesn't have to take 3 months of roaring lessons. It just roars because it's of its nature. Yes? Now this is the situation. What happens when that lion, young lion, what happens when the old lion leaves and the young lion leaves the water hole? Very quickly thereafter, the mental programming that is the sheep kicks in and claims to have had a lion experience. So to me, the important part of the message isn't about what you are, it's about what you're not. Yeah. By seeing what you're not, you're necessarily seeing it from what you are, because that's the only place you're seeing everything from. So the idea of negation for me, in a way, is the only way that works. Yeah. And what gets negated is finding ways that work. Yeah. Yes. To be left with your own devices, to recognize they're not your devices. Yeah. That's not going to come when people keep giving you shit to grasp and to do and to understand. You're constantly being engaged with those devices. Yeah. Trying to find something out that it's impossible for that to find out. Yeah. So basically, I found it was more important to follow the lion from the water hole and to make sure it has an understanding. Let's call it a non-dual understanding, which will bring into stark contrast the dualistic understandings or misunderstandings. Yeah. So that event that you now is called an experience of being a lion was a glimpse of your own nature. Yeah. The point is, you're not the sheep. Yes. You never were the sheep and you never will be the sheep. It's not like you were a sheep and suddenly you woke up that now you're a lion. You were never a sheep. That's the waking up. Yeah. You wake up to the fact that you've never not been what you are. Yeah. So you lose interest in the need to be liberated, because that which needs to be liberated is in you. Yes. There you
And,
go.
and the way you just described that is actually exactly how the process unfolded for me, because I was in my 20s, severely depressed, severely anxious, suicidal ideation on a daily basis. And I wasn't even a seeker at that point. I wasn't seeking anything in particular. I was just a miserable, person in my life. And then wham, it hit me out of nowhere. It was this 4-month period of complete silence in my mind and a direct recognition of what this is and what I am. I can't explain it in words. But what happened after that is, as my mental processes and everything started kicking back in after being offline for a good 4 months, then the seeking actually began after that, where I'm like, all right, how do I get back to being
Yeah.
that? And it took me a really long time to work out where the mistake in my thinking was that, what am I trying to work myself back to? I've already seen I am that whatever. And I can't describe it. Like, even calling it a line is, in a sense, creating a picture of what
Yeah.
that is, which is even, I understand for the purpose of analogy, but to even try and formulate that in my mind, I end up, you end up going down another rabbit hole. And I find this is what happens with a lot of seekers who are a little bit more seasoned or mature or have had some kind of insight or glimpse, is it almost amps up their seeking rather than, all right, a
Yeah.
relief, okay, now I don't need to seek. Now it's like, all right, I need to seek that all the time. Whereas you're exactly right. It's this daily process of clarifying what you're not. That's all there is to any of this. Is these are setups. Society is a setup. Relationships are setups, and they're mutual understanding. I mean, we've both decided to do this podcast. You're my guest. I'm your host. We're playing these roles, and we're playing nice with each other. That's all society really is. But then we start taking that to be reality, and then gets a bit muddled, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's Paul over there, and this is Shiv, and Paul's supposed to do this, and Shiv's supposed to do that. That's where it gets a bit confusing for people.
Well, that's the why the understanding has to come with the package, because the understanding of non-duality is just an understanding of the misunderstandings. It's sort of the old thing with Ramana, with the story of the guy walking down the road and his foot hurts, and he finally stops, takes a look, and there's a thorn in his foot. So he looks around the road and he finds another thorn, and he digs out the first thorn. He doesn't replace the first with the second thorn. He throws both of them away. So basically, in a way, an understanding of non-duality is temporarily valuable to bring into stark contrast the misunderstandings, yes, of duality. And when you realize the misunderstandings don't have to go, but they always have, there's a holder of the understanding because of the dualistic. So there's the understandee and there's the understood. Yeah. That's what gets questioned. The understanding I could care less about, but the idea that it's you that needs an understanding is just an add-on. And that two-ness can only make up a mythical oneness, where the primary number in this math is 0, not 1. Yeah. So, and nothing is the gift that keeps on giving, basically. Yeah. So that's what happened with me. I heard satsangs. I was seeing something I couldn't put into words, but I felt like there'd be a group and there would be a special person in front of the group. And it was called non-duality, but the group felt the special person had something they didn't have. So that was obviously two-ness right there. And basically under the banner of non-duality. So I felt something was off. And then I was reading stuff because there's a number of people wrote about Ramana Maharshi's teachings, yeah. And I would see that this one statement usually was prefaced as the problem or the greatest mystery. And it was this idea of a non-existent thing being existing and then wanting salvation for itself. And if that's the case, and the assumption with the writings was that's the case, it wasn't like a chance possibility. It was that's the initial mental conception of I am Paul. Yeah. And so if that's the case, the spiritual practices themselves are reinforcing the non-existent thing. How can they destroy it? So basically, yeah. You can't, I mean, if you just sit with that, there's no wiggle room. You can't get out of there alive, so to speak.
I get a lot of flack from people who, they've got their spiritual practices, they're meditating an hour to 2 hours daily. And I say, okay, those are great things, do them. They make you feel great. I recommend exercise as well, walking out in nature, but none of those things are going to do anything for you. They're just stuff that you do, right? But there's this idea in non-dual culture, and I call it culture because the culture is different from non-duality, the experience of it, that liberation is something someone can go after and seek. Like there's the promise of liberation. And you see it even in writings of people like Ramana or Nisargadatta, not that they're saying you can be liberated, but they seem to be speaking from this place that's different from the reader's space. And there's this implied, oh, this guy's got something I haven't, so how do I get it? That's a bait, right? And then people are off to the races trying to then get it. And then it becomes a situation of standing in the river selling the water. And how do you get people off that? Because that's been my thing is I like, there's a phrase you use on your website, non-duality and recovery. I wanted to ask you about that because my first book is called Sobering Insight for Spiritual Addicts, because my approach is really it's kind of a rehab, because I see spirituality becomes a kind of addiction.
Yes.
And then starts feeding that self. The very thing you're trying to liberate is what you're then addicted to, right? You're just calling it spirituality. So what's the recovery part of it for you?
Well, I don't put on, I don't even make, I didn't make the website really. But the idea of recovery, you know, when I first, I was sharing ideas in recovery that had a lot of connection to non-duality ideas, but I had no idea. It was just happening. And we put out, and you know, the idea of prophet, not saying I'm a prophet, but the prophet's never recognized in his own village. My own recovery community had neutered me by naming me. My Buddha Paul, non-self Paul, fourth step Paul. Yeah, so they weren't hearing anything that was coming through anymore, really. So we put out a website with the hopes that some people in recovery would like to hear this idea that the real root of the addiction, to me, uh, addiction is a mental addiction to the idea of being a self, meaning the doer, the thinker, the haver, the loser. Yes, that sense of being the doer of a lot of shit you have nothing to do with. So that to me is the addiction, really. And then other addictions are attempting to get relief from that addiction, but misunderstood because you want to get free from self as self. Yeah, you want to be there to experience your own absence, which is impossible. Yes. So I saw when we put out the website, people from outside of recovery got in touch with me and asked me to go places, and I started giving talks at spiritual groups, and then I could see the spiritual addiction happening. Yeah, and then I would put it out there, and then a person in the group who'd been there for a whole week. I'd come there on a Sunday, and they had them there for 6 days, and they bring new teachers in on a Sunday, and then I would go and give this little take, and then the guy would go, "I get what you're saying. Now give me an example," and I go, "Voila!" Like everyone excludes themselves from the example. Yeah, this is this idea. That's one of the movements of self is that, yeah, everyone else is spiritually addicted, but I'm not. Even though I do the same thing, I talk the same thing. Yes, there's always a sense of separation that the selfing affords. Yeah. So this happened, and it was very, very clear. And, you know, I did tons of cocaine in my life, but I never once thought I was cocaine. But I believe most of us are starting from that point of addiction. We're taking ourselves to be the mental drug. That's far, far, far off. Because I was an extreme drug user, yet I never thought I was the drug I was taking. We're in the constant assumption we are the drug that we're taking. That's incredible addiction experience. I mean, demonstration. And I would say again, imagery in time, that's the original addiction, is the mental addiction to this idea of being a thing, a someone, a special, whatever. And whatever it meets, it can use that event as a vehicle to further express its addiction. Now, in spirituality, you think even it's immune to that. I did. I thought spirituality was a different quality of activity, like much different, much more profound than washing dishes. And I had some beliefs that that which is claiming and taking over this life won't do it in a spiritual setting. But I was again proven to be quite wrong. And yeah, so I went out and just started to share a lot about that. And that's just been part of the things. And so in the recovery, see, in recovery, it's appropriate to be helpful. When I'm doing like a non-duality, it's not appropriate to be helpful. You don't really want to be helpful there. In a way, you want people to be left with their own devices to see they're not theirs. But in recovery, that's from the action figure point of view. That's the tribe I'm in. I attempt to be helpful. So in this way, you're trying to bring the diagnosis of recovery to its ultimate end because they didn't do it in the beginning. I don't think they did. They didn't have a clear understanding of what selfing is or self is, and I believe it's the act of being identified as self, a complete verb. The act of being identified as self is a mental activity. Whenever you go into a mental process, it's in that. It's doing that at that time. It's in the act of being identified as self. So if the attention and interest, not yours, the attention keeps going there, it's going to come out of there with a lot of assumptions. Yeah. Yeah. So, so that's what we're doing now. I have 2 meetings a week in recovery with the hope, and it's not an AA meeting. We make a clear distinction, and we're putting that out to people in recovery. Hopefully, they'll stop calling what's defeating them themselves. They'll see it as some foreign movement. And if you can see it as something foreign, you can be free from it. If you keep calling it you, you're going to be bound by it. Yeah. Even in your attempts to be free. Yes. So,
Yeah, what's interesting is that I often talk about this with people, like the human brain is like a chemical factory. I mean, any synthetic drug you can get on the streets has a correlation to a chemical that's already in your brain. And if you can manufacture more of it, you're getting hooked to that in your brain. You don't even need to take that chemical, right? You get addicted.
yeah.
And that's what you see happening with like dopamine addictions when people are on Facebook all day or waiting for their next Instagram. Like they're addicts. They're addicted to that chemical hit they're getting in their brain. And so the way I talk about being sober, not just from an addiction to drug or alcohol use, but from an addiction to your own brain chemicals, is sober feels like dull, mundane, ordinary. If it feels blissful, if it feels fireworks, you're probably high. Nothing wrong with getting high. Getting high is fun. But if you're high all the time, you probably have some form of an addiction you're not aware of to your own self-identity, right? And you're right. That's where
Yeah.
it comes in. That's the hook, is the self-identity, because the self-identity can do infinite number of things, whereas you, as a piece of flesh in this moment, can do maybe 5 things. You're restricted by the walls around you, by the time of day it is, by the weather, by many things. You don't have the freedom to do a whole lot. You can do like limited things. But your self-identity in your mind, I mean, it can do amazing things. It can live through
Yeah.
space
We
and
call
time.
that what's not happening. So,
What's not happening? That's right.
yeah, most of the
That's
time, the head is in what's not happening.
and that's where
But
your self-identity lives, in what's not happening, the action
exactly.
figure.
And it brings a great, it's like a weather front now. You don't even notice it coming in or out because it seems to stay. But this is what's causing an irritability, restlessness, and discontent. And you're getting a wrong diagnosis, and therefore you're pursuing a solution that isn't a solution. Yes. But again, you're being fed this idea of you every step of the way. So, I mean, you're not on a path. You want the spotlight is you on the path. Yeah. Yeah. So, but
Yeah,
I don't have any dog in the hunt about people getting it or not. It's just out of my jurisdiction. I sit here. I truly have a sense that it's has nothing to do with me what comes through, and just put it out there. And sometimes my action figure has an opinion which is not like that which is coming through, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, like I'm frustrated at these people or something like that. And it doesn't matter. It's like it's a seat assignment. I just show up, something comes through, uh, whatever. This isn't a something. you know Success has a lot of different meanings. Yeah. Yeah. And I just show up, that's all.
so
Yeah.
what would you say to somebody who goes, because there are people who would say something like this. Let's say there's something that's bothering you and you're like, oh, fuck this, or this politician, or whatever, something's going on in the world that really pisses you off, and you express it. And you'll have non-dual seekers, or people who really don't understand what non-duality is about but think they do. and they'll go, "Oh, Paul, there's so much selfing going on. You seem like you're totally like self-identified in this moment." Like, what's your response in those cases to people?
Well, hopefully it's like a juvenile state. Yeah. So of course, what claims the message is the hearer of the message, and then it tries to give it its own spin. Like for me, I had a prime example when I first started to hear these ideas. I was living in Australia. I had a house with a lady, and the lady was going out with her friends, and she told me, "Hey, Paul, when can you wash the dishes and clean up around the house?" And she left, and when she came back, the dishes weren't done, nobody cleaned up, and she says, Paul. I said, there's no Paul to do the dishes and shit like that. And she said, "Fuck you, Paul, do the dishes." Yeah. So I could see in hindsight the head had claimed the message of non-duality. It was trying to sort of milk its own little shit out of it. And hopefully it's a stage, a period. If you keep getting nothing, it should break that idea. Many ideas, really. Yeah. The point is to really, that thing I shared about the Ramana story about the compassion is not to dilute the message. Yeah. The compassion is not to dilute it. Yeah. Just keep putting it out there and let it do what it will do, what it does. Yeah. 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 I don't believe anything that you do as an action figure for the next 80 years leaves a mark anyway. So really, if someone wants to believe that they can become awake, they're already successful. They are awake. So basically, you know what I mean? At least if you truly believe you have to keep going places, maybe you'll be walking leisurely, instead of fucking running with focus. You know what I mean? Just like we say in AA, Rule 60T, don't take yourself so seriously. Yeah. Yeah. That's not something you can do. That's an effect that you arrive at. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm too many people in the spiritual community take themselves way too seriously, especially
Yeah.
the moment they start thinking about this whole idea of pursuing liberation, all of that. There's no humor. There's no lightheartedness about anything. Everyone's stiff. Everyone's constantly posturing with each other. They're trying to prove that they're not a person, right?
As the
As a person.
But it's the person trying to prove they're not a person. That's the dilemma. The only thing that doesn't want to be a person is a person.
And what I say to people is, so what if you had an outburst? So what if you have human emotions? So what if something pisses you off? So what about any of that? Why does that matter? The very fact that it matters, it has to matter to somebody. And who
Yes.
is that somebody matters to? And why does it matter to that person? Why do you care? Why do you care if the Buddha looks peaceful all the time? Why would you want to be like that? So there's this idea that if you're liberated, you'll be like a Ramana, right? You'll be like this guy who's peaceful all the time, doesn't have an emotional outburst, doesn't feel anything about anybody, and is just able to be equal. It has this equanimity all the time. But it's
But that's
almost
a hope
like,
for that's a hope for something that's naturally volatile to stabilize. That's not that's that's an experiential effect that's given the name of being. Yeah. It's not You're not going to find being in the experiential level, in a sense. The experiential level is very volatile, constantly. So if you're trying to line up the blocks to stay, maybe you can do it with a controlled environment for 2 weeks where you're not getting calls and eating great food and foot massages and shit. But 9 o'clock, everything can be incredibly blissful. 9:02, the situation changes, and there goes your blocks. It's just insane. But I feel a lot of people, when they get a free sample, after it's been claimed by the mental state can only see it as an experience it had, and then it wishes for stabilization. It wants it that which is completely agitated, this activity of selfing, to be stable. It's just a fucking wet dream. Yeah. Yeah. This is another thing that should go fast. Yeah. If you can keep going to satsang, yeah, and hear it, you'll start seeing this stuff as not you. And yeah. But most people go through that. What people are wishing for is a static experience, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
They want everything just to be stabilized and be nice. And this is a mental dream. It's of the mental. The being is underneath. Yeah. People, and when you believe you've lost something, this level is the level of losing and finding. Underneath it, there's no loss or find. Yeah. Yeah, but I feel like there's a apt free samples of being here, but the mental state turns it into an experience. Now it wants to have it's included in the mix, and it wants that being to stabilize as an experience, which is insane. But hey, whatever. Good luck.
And it seems like people are more invested in the mental state. Like even if you were to convince them exactly of this, that your being is always is a one perpetual constant, it's never changed. But your mental state will keep changing. They'll be like, but I want my mental state to stabilize.
Well,
Because
that's
they're trying
great.
to escape the suffering, right? Because that's really what most spiritual seeking seems to be about. Not really truth. They say it's I want to see the truth. But really what they want is to feel better about life.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, a lot of spiritual stories are they're rooted in dissatisfaction and discontent. If you were satisfied, content, your spiritual seeking would drop precipitously because that's what you're looking for. We just misnamed shit. Yeah. If you felt okay, you wouldn't be trying to feel okay. You'd be okay with feeling not okay. You would. So this is what you run into. These are the mental logic has its flaws, FLAWSs, and they can be more pronounced when you're not seeing it from the mental logic. You can see it. You can see the failed system basically eats its own tail. It just doesn't. It promotes a myopic view, and then it can only conceptualize panoramic. It can only conceptualize a lot of shit. It's like the most terrible like policed artist to draw a likeness to the what it's trying to describe. It's out to lunch completely. Yeah, I mean, people believe. Look at what they did in the West. Jesus was a white left coast surfer dude, blue eyes and blonde hair. When he's Arabic, swarthy probably, but the imagery is unbelievable.
Yeah, Jesus was born in California, right?
Exactly. He was down in Redondo Beach. Yeah. He took off for 12 years and showed back up. So, it's just, but what's one can do? All you can do is, I don't know. I wasn't looking for this seat assignment. I just felt compelled to be of help. And then I realized when I first was in recovery 34 years ago, I could articulate things people had a hard time. And can understand patterns more than specifics. I just don't see, whatever. And so recognizing that I could be of use, that I was okay with that. So I was put to use by sharing and leading workshops. And then it would just lead to, once I got these ideas coming of non-dualities, those workshops changed and they were really satsangs. And then people were slow to get it. Once they realized it wasn't AA, pretty much left. I didn't see them ever again. They loved what I said as long as it was held in the context of AA. If you introduced to them the Zen bitch slap, you'd never see them again. That's amazing, yeah?
Yeah, that is fascinating because I actually had another guest on a couple of podcasts ago who was in AA for a number of years, probably still is, because I don't think you ever, quit your affiliation with AA. And then he became a spiritual addict later in life. And he's like, they're basically the same thing. It's just different words, different concepts. It's the same addiction. And it's applicable to both groups. But you're right. Like the moment you switch your language, it's like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm not a drunk. So
Uh,
why do I have to talk about this? I'm not an addict. Like spiritual seekers don't see the addiction aspect of what they're doing, right?
well, it may not be beneficial for what they're doing to see that. If they're wanting to go somewhere, you got there is a certain blindness to what's going on if you're wanting to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and
It
also
seems
I
like you
feel
need to reach
teachers
that
get
point.
captured by people too. Teachers get captured in a way by groups
Yeah.
energetically. They
It
do.
happens both
So,
ways, right?
yeah, you have to start feeding the group. Like I remember I used to go to this one guy. I liked his talk. Yeah, the energy was cool. Then they'd have questions, and it usually turn into relationships. And then the first question would be relationship, and then the second one, and then the horses were out of the barn, and he couldn't get them back in. And you could feel the difference of the energy in the room. It became therapy very quickly. Yes. And what is one to do? He's got 50, 80 people there, and he didn't seem, you gotta snuff it out right at the beginning. Once it gets momentum, you're in a relationship therapy session under the banner of non-duality. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that happened with me right in the beginning when I started my page and writing these books, and people would reach out to me for sessions. And when I sat down and talked to them, I would basically be like, listen, I can't really help you figure your life out. I barely have my own shit figured out.
Yeah.
I'm still like, I have a job, I have kids, I've got a life, I'm trying to get my taxes paid. Don't ask me for financial advice. You'll get crap financial advice from me. But all I can say is don't sweat this stuff to the extent that you are. It's not as big a deal, but it's sort of on repeat. So after a certain point, people are like, all right, I got as much as I could out of Shift. It's not like I can get that much more. And they start leaving you alone. So I barely ever do these one-on-one sessions anymore. But I can see how it's easy to get sucked into that because suddenly people see value in what you have to say. And
Oh,
how,
yeah.
how did you deal with that kind of attention when you
Well, the
started?
funny thing is, I usually don't do it, and a guy had a good move on me today from Australia. He sent me money before he asked me. So I said, that was a good move because he said, I already sent you 100 Australian dollars. And I said, wait a minute, I didn't even say I'd do anything. But I had to appreciate that move. I don't know. I don't usually do that way. Sometimes I do, but uh, I don't. I tend to veer away from it. I feel the best of Paul Hedderman is on the talks, and I think the impersonal, because the message isn't to you or to me. It's through us. You're the obstacle in a way. So we're trying to speak around you to that which is everywhere. And all we got to do is, I can't miss everywhere. I just got to miss your mitts. I got to miss your little grasping and thing. So we tend to speak a lot. And when someone has a gets something, we dump more on. So you don't able to sit there. We don't go into pauses or let's close our eyes. We don't do anything. Just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And then hopefully the spiritual subpoena got in and shit. So one-on-ones, I don't. Uh, I had this one lady, she was a trip. She had spent over $1 million on all this shit. I could hear her family outside the door. I think she was barricaded in her video room. She said she's been watching videos for 13 hours straight and shit. And I said, she says, can I have a session? I said, well, hopefully it's going to be your last session. And I never heard from her again, so hopefully it worked. But yeah, it had taken a real, she had got, whatever. But that's the thing. The head's going to make whatever it comes in contact with. It's going to make it into something. You've got to withstand, let's say, that assault and stay with the nothing, and then then you lose all that interest and all that shit, and then there you are. Yeah. But a lot of people, over the years, I can see certain types of people they're experiential junkies. So they hear about Paul H. and they come, and I know they're not going to stay long because they want to have prana, kriyas, fucking kundalini and shit. And maybe they will or not, but you can see that they're just collecting experience. It's not them, it's just the head's addicted, so it's going off. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, I call it spiritual consumerism. And I think that's why this whole non-duality thing is blown up into the mainstream now, like spirituality as an industry, because most people in society are like that now. They're like, oh, okay, what are the 50 countries I've traveled to? What's on my bucket list? And next thing, it's spiritual experiences, spiritual teachers, where have I gone and done retreats? That's it. That's a value now in society. Like, how much new shit can I experience, right?
Yeah.
And the guy who's going to give me that feeling of novelty every time is the guy I'm going to keep going back to. Not the guy who's going to tell me, hey, ordinary life is where it's at. It's going to be the guy who's giving me that spicy sort of that hook, right? That brings me back each time.
Well, the thing too, in that kind of relationship, the only monogamous one is the teacher. All the other people are seeing tons of people, usually. They're mixing so much stuff up. And now also they have the heroic journeys to Peru and ayahuasca. They've got a lot of hallucinogenic stuff going on. And yeah, so the mind can stay enthused a long time chasing.
So with the action figure, the self identity, like there's a practical value to having an action figure identity because that's the one that goes out and does stuff and engages with society and all of that. I find like many people I speak to, the ones who are stuck in the seeking mentality, for them, it needs to be an on-off switch. Hey, either I am the action figure, or if I'm not the action figure, I need to get rid of this parasite. They call it the parasite, like the mind is a parasite, the ego is a parasite. I'm like, no, it's not a parasite. It's a useful tool. That's all it is. It's like a hammer. You want to bash a nail in with your forehand or with a hammer? You use a hammer. You're not an idiot. So similarly, you want to engage with society, use yourself. You're given a self, and you could use it. It's very versatile. It's a character you can, people can relate to it. The government can relate to it. Use it, but they're not able to cope with that sort of paradoxical. I don't see it as a paradox, but it feels like a paradox to them.
Yes. Well, that's duality in an extreme. Yeah. So either I am or I'm not. There's not an inclusiveness. It's excluded. It's either I'm this or I'm that. They can't cohabitate, so to speak. So basically, the action figure holds. It's sort of like instead of the action figure in the zoom would take one square instead of the whole square. Yes. So now before it had all the squares. Yeah. Now it has one or two, whatever, and it functions better in that way in a world of plans and designs, not big plans and big designs. Yes. And then there's that sense of space as the context. Yeah. That works. And I don't see, a lot of people get into difficulty with the action figure and that as two different things. They can't, one's got to go or one, yes. It's just, but then again, that's another juvenile take that you hope will drop. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because
So do you see
obviously,
that juvenile take dropping up with many people you speak to? Because I don't see it.
I have over time. Yes. If you stick with satsang, and I mean satsang, just the association with it, with a message that puts the light on the searching, not on the searcher or something. Yes, I feel that you can go through a phase where those mistakes aren't unique. They're just a mistaken way of seeing something anew. Yeah, and they drop off in time, I find. Yeah. Yes, I believe it does. Yeah, I've seen it through satsang. Yeah,
Yeah, just like
I've never done a thing after satsang. I got introduced, I guess, in the late '90s, and I haven't done any practice or anything ever really. Yeah, and but a whole lot of downloads have occurred just by being here. Yeah, and I've seen tons of people, tons of them, and I watched patterns in the reaction of the mental state to the gospel, the good news or no news, and it's typical. It's typical. Yeah, like people when they realize there's the idea that if they don't have self will, they'll be laying on the couch all day, and it just goes on, and it's easy to see, and then hopefully, if you keep hearing the message, that will drop. Yeah.
it's like the idealization of the non-dual state as being this unusual or extraordinary space in which you're not human anymore, you're superhuman and you're beyond human.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, all you need to do is look at any sort of child under the age of 3 or 2, and you're like, oh, well, they're just like normal human beings. They're just not thinking about shit all the time, and they're not preoccupied with where they're going to be or where they were yesterday. They're just moving through life fairly spontaneously, just reacting to things as they go along, like every other organism. And so do human beings. We just complicate things a little bit more than necessary, but there's not this non-dual state. Again, it tends to be a little bit romanticized, I think, when you got people interpret guys like Ramana or Nisargadatta, and they're like, well, Nisargadatta talked about this fourth state, this turiya, in which even when he was asleep, he could be aware, and then when his daughter died, he felt nothing. And I'm like, you don't know that. You weren't there. He probably felt pretty fucking shitty for a long time. He just didn't blow it out of proportion, talk about it all the time. His own private life. Why is he going to do that? But it's this, again, like you said, it's pretty juvenile, this idea of
But that's another one
idealizing.
of them. That's another one of the common misunderstandings. And what's going to have to go is the new understanding has no purpose other than to bring into contrast the misunderstandings. Yeah, and satsang gives you the atmosphere for that to continue. So you come in and you hear a message, and what reacts to it is the mental state, and it brings up its ideas. And hopefully, if you have the same space of satsang, that you'll see through that, and you'll see through that, and you'll see through that. And then it'll be very, very clear what you're not, and there'll be an intimation of what you are. Yeah. You'll have blue will be blue and red will be red. Things will be clear, not by you doing anything or breathing or hyperventilating, just is. And so these things are common misunderstandings that are triggered when you meet nothing, so to speak. The idea of non-duality, which is nothing really. It's a negation of duality. That's all it is. There's nothing called non-duality. There's no non-duality meaning. There's meanings on duality, really. Yeah. And so these misunderstandings, they're great that they actually come up, because then they're going to go down. It's when they're not ever even being looked at and everything is being fit around them. That's just something else. At least in this case, these are dropping. Yeah, dropping. And it's because that's what you want to initiate. You want to initiate the mental state's reaction so that you can finally see it, because it will do quite well lying in the weeds. Yeah. And you'll have no fucking idea that your starting point is of time, not timelessness, that you've been manufactured. Yeah, this idea of Paul is a manufacturing, and it needs time to do it. So I love when this shit comes up because they're not unique. I've seen tons of people with the same thing, wanting stabilization of an experience, calling that being, all this, all that. And this is sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. The imaginary trees drop. Yeah, so I feel I like that stuff in a way because how are you going to know the emperor has no clothes unless you see it? So you got to see the clothes, and then there they go. Yeah, yeah. If there,
And you
and there's
can't,
no point, like our whole target, if we give any target and it's traveling lighter, basically. That's what, because really, that's what the, like, for the ass of this imaginary action figure, it needs a cushion. That's its definition of traveling lighter on a talk like this. So it sits on a cushion, yeah? So this way, sometimes you can't have a cushion. So you'll be able to travel lighter through that, cushion or no. That's all. We're not saying everything's going to go great, but you'll travel lighter with whatever life has in store for you. What more do you want? Yeah, that's our take. And how do you? When does the opportunity of travel lighting occur? You've got to know some of the parameters. You can't travel light as that which is heavy. It's just you can try as much as you want. It's always going to go back to its default, which is heaviness. Yeah. So let's stop fucking trying to become awake as what can't be awake. Yeah. This is an apparition. This is an appearance. And, let's have 4-week retreats about self will. When Ramana had it very beautiful, where he says, hey, if there's a sense of individuality, there'll be a sense of free will. It's a package deal. So you want to keep the sense of individuality, but now believe that it's predetermined. It's just smoke. Yeah. So just look at the individuality, not from it. That's not looking at it. That's looking from it. But we are not, we may seem to have a geographical, physical, temporal location, but we are not in that location ultimately. Yes? We may be gazing through this location, but we are not of this location. So we can see what we're not of. Yeah? From what we're of. Yeah? So that to me is the point. Yeah? Is you see
just
what you're not from what you are. Because
just
you
the
are the
other day,
hmm?
just the other day, an ad popped up on my Facebook newsfeed. It's an Eckhart Tolle retreat. He's doing like a 5-day intensive in Hawaii called something like integrating with the Tao. Like this, he's been at it for 20, 25 years. Like what more could we do in an intensive retreat that you haven't already done, right? But
Yeah, but
just to
see, a lot
clarify,
of
when you
people found friendship and connection there and community. That's
that's
what it is.
that's it, right? And
Yeah,
that's everything built around it. It's the culture,
yeah,
the community, the friendship, feeling of belonging. I'm getting better. We're all getting better together. We're all
yes.
advancing
I
together.
think that's those needs, because our society in a lot of ways isn't providing it. It isn't. The family structure a lot of times for people isn't seemingly providing it. So now it's mutated into these things where you pay and whatever and da da. But really, you just want to feel a sense of belonging because we're rooted in a sense of separation, which isn't true. But that's why we feel we're disconnected, so we want to feel connected. So hey, he's they're playing a role. That community's playing a role. A lot of people are probably traveling a little lighter than they would, and yeah. But again, it would be nice if it's sort of like if you bought meat and it said bacon and it was tri-tip. You'd like to have the description correct
Right.
about what you're looking for and not call it something that it ain't, like
And
spirituality.
that, yeah, and that's always been my point. I have no problem with communities providing comfort, there's support groups, millions of them online. You can go out and join them in your own town. But call it what it is, right? Call it exactly what it is. We're providing support. We're providing community. But it's always this, what I find with what happens within spiritual culture, it's promoting one thing and providing something else. It's promoting
Yeah.
truth, but providing the feel good. And as if a person calls themselves a spiritual teacher, then as a teacher, your job is to teach something and for your students to learn something and get the hell out of there once they've learned it. You don't have high school teachers with grade 9 students sitting around for 5-6 years in their classroom. No, they're done grade 9, they move on to grade 10, they get out of there. But when you have a customer, you want them to stick around because that's your strategy
Well, the
is
thing,
retention
again,
at that point.
it's almost Orwellian in a lot of ways, but most things are. It is. It's a lot of misrepresentation. And sometimes you get carried away. Probably maybe Eckhart Tolle was going to retire, and then he went on Oprah, and then now he's been called back to do his golden oldies for 25 more years. And the demand sometimes creates the need, so to speak. Who knows? I have no idea. I've never been in that position. I don't know. I don't, and I'm happy not to be. I much rather play very small. Yeah. so, because I've seen the dangers of stuff. See, if
So
there's a
would you say you've
position in.
intentionally steered clear of doing that kind of stuff when the
Oh yeah,
opportunities
yeah. I've
arose?
just we're like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. We're just not organized, but there's an intention there for sure. I don't want. I remember when I first started giving outside engagements, and people would give you this thing, and no, not into this. And then what breeds that is infrequency and exclusiveness. And I just go out and have coffee and hang out. We're all, so everyone. First they buy me dinner, then they're buying me dessert, then they're buying me coffee. Now I'm buying them coffee. It just goes, the specialness goes out the window quickly. But we breed that. We don't want to have that idea of things. Because this is what the beautiful thing is that those things come up, because that's when they can be cut down in a sense. If they don't come up, it's really an overgrowth. Yeah. So I love when the triggering occurs, because then you get to see the thing you're not. Yeah. A lot of these systems, they fit themselves around the thing you're not. Yeah, that's the last thing they want to disturb. So it's a business in a way. So let's have that feel better, but let's not threaten it. It's like people got in touch with me. It was such a strange situation. A French headhunter who knew the talks. These guys, rich guys, were building a rehab in Chiang Mai, Thailand. One of the biggest rehabs, this guy had owned the land, and then he kicked the original rehab, and he wanted to do his own. So they got in touch with me through this guy, headhunter, and they wanted me to be the program director. I said, I'm not directing any fucking program, but I'm more than happy to talk to you. So we would talk, and I said, you got to emphasize service, And he says, so they said, oh, you mean tailor the service around each customer because these people are paying $50,000 or something? I said, no, fucking throw the customer in the service. Yes. You don't want to keep fitting this message around the thing it's negating. Yes, that's the whole point. But see, let's say you have a big thing going on, and a lot of people make a livelihood out of your big thing. You have a video director, you have this, those brochures are made up by a graphic designer, those people are eating. So in a weird way, it's producing a lot of good outcomes. Now, to me, it would be nice to have the correct banner, but what the hell? Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't know. What can I say? It's getting used. And so maybe if people, they want to fork out $2,000 to sit through a guy speaking once a day to hang out with all their friends, if our life has gotten to that far out, okay. It's probably a small cost to feel connection, I guess. Yeah. But again, it would be nice if it was clearly described. Yeah, yeah.
Well, especially since spirituality or non-duality is supposed to be about clearing things up,
I
right? I
know.
mean, that's the whole premise of it. So if
But isn't that funny?
understandably, isn't that fun? That's the irony of it, right? It's
Yes.
in one of my articles I made a comparison to like American wrestling, which is obviously fake. But when I watched it as a kid, I believed that shit. Right?
Yes.
I
I know.
believe the Undertaker came back to life every time he was killed in the ring.
Those
As
chairs must really hurt.
right?
Boom.
Yeah, and then you see the fake blood coming out, but they never have a black eye, nothing swollen, but they're
I
getting
know.
beat the shit out of. And as an 8-year-old, you're like, oh my God, this is really happening. And when it kicks in, it's fake. Something within you is like, oh man, I feel cheated. Except
Yeah.
American wrestling has never really tried to pretend like it's real. They've been pretty, clear from the get-go, this is entertainment. Now, if the spiritual industry came out with, that message saying, all right, you know, the core message is fairly simple. Everything else we're doing around it is a form of entertainment. But hey, entertainment is great. I mean, I watch Netflix every day. I love entertainment. And let's get you guys to pay for the entertainment value of sitting with this guy who's got these tremendous insights, or come into this conference where you have 50 people on a panel. Great, let's pay for the entertainment value. And if you market it to your customer like that and you gave them a chance to make that choice, in transparency, I'd be like, hey, this spiritual culture is great. Go for it. Go to those retreats, go to those intensives. But that's not the message. The message is this is the last one. You're gonna get it. You're all the
Yeah.
and then you're gonna have that, awakening moment. Whereas your approach seems very sort of uncompromising in the sense that you're like, that's not what any of this is about. You're very clear from the get-go, from day one, from the moment you start speaking to
Well,
anybody is
it's sort of like in a relationship, one of the person has to be clear. If it's going south for both of them, one's got to be clear. You would assume the person who had the seat assignment of directing the meeting, or being the one certainty at the meetings, would have a responsibility in a certain level to be clear of when it's going another way, other than how it's been presented. Yes, you would hope that you could cut that off at the thing. I don't know. Just like they say with communes and stuff, a commune can work if there's less than 37 people or 75 people. Once it gets more and organized, it can't produce the effects that were being produced when there was less people. I would think that may happen with a lot of folks. Yeah. And then that feeling of wanting to be helpful gets compromised and gets mutated in a way, and then it's out of the barn, so to speak. Yes. And now they have to have someone make up a title for each intensive, like integrating everyday life with whatever. And it's just, I mean, obviously they know it's absurd, they must, but they're sort of captured in the machinery itself. Yeah. I find that so one of the easy remedies for that is smallness, disorganization. You don't have a business plan. You don't have a future. Yeah, you're just basically doing it because that's what you're doing. Yeah, so that keeps it. There's nothing to break down because nothing actually gets built up. It's just been like this. Like people, come back after 12 years, and I go, and anything new in non-duality? No, there's nothing new in non-duality in 2022. It's the exact same. So, yeah, but I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know what's going on with, but fuck, yeah. There's a lot of people that I think, you know, people are trying to. There's a capturing of what we seem to be by what we're not, and it has some specific ways of triggering permission. So sometimes people believe they've got to do certain shit to have a permission to be okay. And maybe it has to do with spending a lot of money and going to that retreat and shit. And really, maybe the end, the means don't just, but the end's all right, fuck it. If that's what it takes, hallelujah, just to be okay. If you have to pay $2,000 to convince yourself that you can be okay, fucking far out, in a sense. So I would hope you would get weaned off it, but and see, the thing is, I used to we had one of our skits about spirituality, that there's like there's no interventions in spirituality. No one's going to walk in and grab you from the satsang and take away your DVDs and shit and bring you to a fucking spiritual rehab. And there's no committee that's going to disapprove your retreat request, even though it's the 32nd time. It would be nice if they had a committee, like a soup Nazi, no retreat for you, because obviously something's not working, but no, it can go on and on and on and on. Yeah. So there's basically, it's like a Wild West. No one really has a touchstone of what's actually so shit's going on like crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no regulation, right? And it's
There's
not like
not.
it's not like you want to regulate people, but then when an industry gets this big and is pulling in billions of dollars a year, at that point you kind of want to regulate it, because it is the Wild West and people are making money off of other people. Some people are conscientious, but hell, there's no control, there's no bar, there's no school you got to go to get your non-duality teaching degree.
No.
Anybody can set up shop anywhere and spew just, and it's mostly regurgitated anyways, right?
Well, the thing is, let me just jump in here with Papaji. He used to live in Lucknow,
Right.
and a lot of people used to go to him. And the old joke was, for you to give satsang, all you had to do is fly over Lucknow. But the funny thing is, it's joking, but it's true. There is no regulation. Yeah. And a lot of shit goes on that, yeah, I made a joke of it, but it's needed in a way, because people are giving all their life savings sometimes and shit like that. And yeah, it can just go, it can get out of hand. Yeah. So,
Yeah, so in my second book, I called it Spiritual Anarchy as being one of the solutions to this. And in all my critique, I never criticize individual teachers. Like, I don't care about individual teachers. Everyone's got their backstory. I have no idea why they end up the way they do. So I have no interest in their own individual lives. But when I look at it, I look at it as a culture, the machine. Like,
that's
where did
good.
this machine, what is it feeding off? It's like got a consciousness of its own, right? And it's just like voraciously feeding on people's lack and insecurity. And in spiritual anarchy, the solution means go back to the grassroots. Those small groups that start with yourself, go down to the very basics. And and that's, and you're right. A lot of this is fed by the lack of community we experience in our social life, right? If I think about where I grew up in India, I had like extended family, grandmothers, all of that. But the moment I moved out to the West, it was isolation. And it's only now that I live in a, part of British Columbia, where it's a small town and there's a great sense of community here, that you start to feel, holy shit, other human beings in life, that this can happen, right? Most people are not living like that. They're living isolated. And so they're driven by that feeling of alienation and lack, and they want something more. And this kind of stuff provides it, which
Yes.
is beautiful, which is
Yes.
beautiful that it does. But the way in which it then exploits that same sense of lack is the
Yes.
part that
But
becomes a bit
this is
scary.
duality. That's duality. Yeah. Yeah. It does something, and then there's on the other hand, there's an exploiting. But yeah, this is what happens. You remember Zen? Everything. Then there was like Zen cushions and Zen vacations. Everything had Zen on it. This is
Yeah, Zen is
non-duality.
as pure as the message gets. I don't know how you distort that, but now it's completely distorted, right?
I know completely. And so this is what the head does. But hey, I see this truly as dreaming anyway. Truly. And it's like, applying henna tattoos, they always wash off. There's no ink, and yeah. So I just see it as the way things roll, and it's like a slinky. One movement produces another movement, and this appearance of duality continues. And in that, there's something called non-duality, as seen from duality, because mostly everything that shows up is seen from duality. It doesn't present. The person who's looking from duality sees it in a dualistic way. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just like the Aboriginal, if they were introduced to a car, they would see it as a house. Yeah. Now, the person who made the car thought it was a moving thing, but to the Aboriginal mind, house. Yeah. Break the windows, lay in there. Yeah. So the same thing. Without knowing it, we are a system, I would say a failed system, a system of noun and verb, of duality, and then we hear something and immediately the emphasis is on the hearer. So as soon as the hearing of the message has been heard by the hearer, it's neutered. It's just the way it goes. And so if you have the space and time to keep reasserting a correction of that which doesn't need to be corrected, because it doesn't change anything, it just seems to, then you can just break that thing down, and it doesn't have an infinite momentum. It dries up in the person. They will, and then there'll be a point where there's a critical mass where the seeing won't be blocked by how many trees there are left, because you'll see the space that the trees are appearing in. The trees are not blocking anything. They're appearing in a much larger space. You'll see it that way. But at first, there seems to be some trees that will definitely spring up when you're introduced to this idea of non-duality. They may need to be knocked down by an understanding. But after a while, it's panoramic. Yes? Yeah. That's
And your metaphor is literally true, because when we think about space, we think of it as being something separate from objects. But even from a physics sense, like the scientific sense, spaces, objects are space as well. Objects expand with space. We're all expanding. And I see that same even in my experience, that spaciousness that I felt during those 4 months where everything was silent. I mean, they're in my thoughts right now. Like they're in my words, they're in my actions. So it's not like the actions are other than the space and I've got to go back to the space, get away from the action, or go back to the space, get away from the thought. Space is in all of that. So exactly
yes,
what you're saying is you're not
exactly.
looking to go beyond the trees.
See, people believe they have to be rid of thoughts to be at peace, but uh, the space is big enough for a lot of things to cohabitate in it. There can be peace while thoughts are going on. Yeah. The peace, it doesn't seem to be available when they're called your thoughts. Yeah. Your thoughts are a different breed of thoughts. Yeah. They've got a much longer life expectancy and they've got a lot more volume and punch because we're giving it to them through the mind. When the mind drops out, thoughts are thoughts, yeah? And to have any kind of requirement to be able to enjoy peace is just a misunderstanding, really. Yeah. The afterward conditions don't have to align with the prior condition. The prior condition outshines the afterthought conditions. Yes. Even though they have their shine, they outshine. Yeah. Yeah. So this idea of stream, it's either this or that. I don't see it that way.
So
Yeah.
what was the process in your own life? You mentioned in the past 20, 30 years ago, addiction. So what were the steps that went from whatever mind state or head state you were in 20, 30 years ago to, Paul's life now?
Well, the funny thing is, because I've lost a lot of interest in it, I don't know. I haven't mapped it out, but I'll say as a story, when I was younger, there was obviously uh, I had trauma. People who I loved died when I was 9. My grandmother brought me up and my father. And I seemed to, or whatever I represent, I would say interest and attention, retreated to the thought system and found protection and a defense against that kind of loss. I got absorbed in the head. And basically, I lived that kind of life, even though I was athlete and stuff. I was living in an interior landscape, and it was flipped out really. And I needed some fucking relief. So first thing I found was 12. I was drinking, and that immediately accelerated into drug use. A lot of it was educational hallucinogens, but then it became an occupation. And that led me down a road of, when I started to drink, I realized I had magnetic appeal to people in uniform. I started to get arrested a lot and run into heavy consequences to the point where I got run over by the same car twice in one night. Really destroyed my physical condition, skeletal wise. And but that didn't deter me. I just kept trying to get out of here. I wanted to escape Paul. I didn't know I was trying to do that as Paul. And then life just took its course. Spent 2 years in a program, many weeks in jails, a lot of years in hospitals, a lot of time in a hospital bed by myself for 10 months. That was interesting experiences, and other states. Then after I got out of this program after 2 years, I went back out again. That led me to a complete pitiful demoralization. I didn't see any hope anymore. And I basically figured I'll just try to stay loaded until I went to jail or another institution or died. And I came out of a blackout. And for people who don't know what a blackout is, it's trippy. It's almost, you wake up and you're like parachuted behind enemy lines. You have no idea what's going on, but no, you haven't been missing. You just think you were. You've been dealing. There's been a Paul dealing with the person in front of you, but the Paul you feel now, the only way it can keep its story is to deny that there was another Paul. So I woke up and I was looking at this guy, and he had a big head and bulbous nose and varicose veins. And I said to myself, and we were drinking this bottle of Royal Gate vodka. And I said to myself, this guy's a bum. And then I thought he looked like he was looking at me like I was a bum. And then that something stopped the head. The screen went blank, which I couldn't imagine that as a possibility. And it was just a big headline, and the headline was, "I'm fucked." Yeah. Now I'd been in this condition for quite a while, but it hadn't ever really landed. Denial was keeping a lot at bay. And right underneath that was, "I'm not managerial quality." That was it. And then I'd never drank or used since then. And I've never had a strong feeling or a thought about drinking or using for 34 years. But what really was important here was that night I got introduced to recovery. If I wouldn't have been introduced to it, it probably would have died on the vine in a day or two. I would have been back to doing the same shit. But life not only whacked me, but it led me to what was going to keep me unwhacked for 34 years till today. Yeah. So I had a very huge demonstration of something doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And that no human power could. My mother couldn't get me sober. The state couldn't. Nothing could. And then from there, my mind was open. And so more shit came in, like non-duality and stuff, because it was open. Things could land, and unpack. And non-duality landed, unpacked some ideas, and I realized I can be convinced of things. Yeah, simple Yeah. And it's from that point on, you know, I started sharing at different groups, and then just got sort of captured by that. But it's an interesting experience because it isn't one when there's a talk. I don't come out with anything out of it, and it's just an empty feeling that I've really grown quite fond of. Yeah, most stuff is interchanging shit, but this is completely empty. And yeah, here I am speaking with you today about it. And I used to have some dogs in the hunt, but it's out of my jurisdiction what that person, what a person represents, is going to do with the message. It's just going to make it into something. And it's so really, we're here more to give warnings about what's going to happen when after you see the reflection of the lion, because you're going to walk away and the sheep identification is going to kick in, and you're going to be thinking, I can have another lion experience as this sheep. Yeah, so I think that's the most important part of the message, is not what we are, but what we're not. So there we are. So that's it. It's been recovery was awesome. I was really a broken character. We have a statement in AA that fit me. I was incapable of having a viable relation to another person. Incapable. Yeah, it was a broken character in a lot of ways. But in a way, because I didn't die, it was very useful. There was a lot of value, because if something plays out in its extreme, it reveals itself. Yeah, and if you can live through it, the revelation is pretty valuable. Where I could see self as foreign, this idea, completely, and that's never changed for years now. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it almost has to hit in a very traumatic kind of way, like either like a near-death experience, like surviving a car crash, or something where your mind is pushed to the brink and it
yeah,
snaps, but you survive the snapping. And that's very much like it was for me. I mean, I wasn't an addict in the sense of substance abuse, but I was at the point where the burden of living was just too much to bear. Like on a minute by minute basis, I was just like, I want to be done, but I'm too chicken shit to do it myself. So I just have to. It's a question of figuring out how to do it in the least painful way. Um, but that snapping and surviving the snapping, I had a very similar kind of, you call it a headline, but it was a very similar kind of message that came to me, which was just very simply, this isn't you. Like all of this that you're carrying, this story, this baggage, this feeling, none of this is me. And when I heard that, it felt like I've always known that. It didn't feel like some
yeah,
revelation. It was like, shit, but I know that. It was kind of like, but I love the headlines where it goes, you're not managerial quality, because that's key. It's not just I'm fucked, because I'm fucked. I think a lot of people arrive at the I'm fucked, but they still believe that they can do something about it. They're qualified
I
to do
know.
something about it, right? Whereas
No, the
you,
managerial quality was essential for this situation. Yeah, because I wouldn't have followed the trail back to see why things were unmanageable. Was the head's managing it? Yes. So the head would have just tried another form of managing. But I believe you can be convinced. So things can happen but it doesn't always have to be that way. Hopefully, satsang provides uh, a safe enough space for mind to open up some of the windows, and then let some shit come in. Because I really feel it's just a shift of interest and attention. Most people are trying to gain interest and attention, but it's really a loss of interest and attention. And in that loss, that myopic way of looking, which is blind really to what's seeing, becomes more of a panoramic view. Yes. So you include the trees and the space, not the trees or the space. Yeah, and it's very inclusive. Yeah, and instead of having this has to have this meaning because I gave that this meaning, no, it's just all vague, and you get dumbed down in a lot of ways. Yeah. I mean, I don't ponder this shit much. Every once in a while, I get downloads to go over it because I'm going to be sharing them. But it's basically my need to know level is pretty low at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Like this morning, I spent an hour trying to fix a broken toilet. Damn thing kept overflowing. And if someone had come to me at that point and said, "Hey, I can summarize the truth of life in a minute. If you've got a minute," I'd be like, "No, fuck that. I got a broken toilet that needs attention
yeah,
right now, right?"
yeah, yeah.
So that's the shift towards ordinary. But this is what people create a hierarchy in their mind of extraordinary and ordinary. And ordinary is one step below the extraordinary, and they want to have the extraordinary experience. Whereas for me, you can call it all extraordinary or all ordinary. It's just what is. And it's pretty freaking cool. I don't know how this is happening right now. I have absolutely no idea, but it is. And I get to witness it. Like what could be more special than that, right? And it needs to, that's as simple as it really ever needs to be, but it's working out all the other kinks in the brain that want something else because it's not
Yeah,
getting it.
because see, uh, if belief isn't given over, you'll see it starkly. Yeah, it's when you're running with it, you don't see it. When you stop running and it's running, you can see it. Yeah, and hopefully you're at a point of disillusionment or whatever that yeah, the emphasis shifts, and it could be 50.001% of attention and interest goes that way, but it makes a huge difference. Yes. The zoom shrinks and then it's whatever. To me, it becomes a comedy resource, actually. Before it was like CNN news flashes, now it's just Comedy Central. It's hilarious in its stubbornness. It's amazing. Yeah. And I am a very true believer. Don't waste any time trying to convince that which can't be convinced. The action figure is not artificial intelligence. It's not growing, it's programming. It's done. It has a ceiling and yeah. So let's move on trying to get this thing to co-sign the situation and just see it as what you're not. Yeah. 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 Hey, I gotta go soon.
Yeah, I
Literally and
was
figuratively. I gotta go.
absolutely, and I was going to say your your point about moving on is a good point to move on from this podcast. But it's been a really good conversation with you. I'm glad one of my readers recommended to reach out to you because I think we see many things in a sort of common light, right?
Well, it's a very nice pleasure. I'm happy life conspired to bring this about, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, stay
Take
in touch
care.
if you like. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, please.
Have a good one, Paul.
All right. See you, bro. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.